The second I walked through that heavy mahogany door, I felt it in my gut. I'd either just made the smartest move of my life or the biggest mistake I'd ever regret. Patricia Whitmore's expression twisted into this strange mix of a forced smile and a sour grimace, like she'd bitten into a lemon but still had to pose for a photo. Her eyes scanned me head to toe, my plain navy dress, the flats I got on sale, my cheap earrings from a corner drugstore, and I could practically see her adding up the numbers in her head and deciding I wasn't worth much. She leaned over to her son, my fiancé Marcus, and whispered something she assumed I wouldn't catch. But I did. Every word. She said I looked like the help who accidentally walked in through the wrong entrance. That's when I knew dinner was about to get real interesting. My name's Ella Graham. I'm 32. And yeah, I've got a confession. For the last 14 months, I've been hiding something big from the man I was supposed to marry. Not something silly like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming the dog. Not even something mildly weird like still cuddling the stuffed animal I've had since I was a kid. No, this secret. It's massive. I make $37,000 a month. That's before taxes. After taxes? Still enough to make most people blink twice and ask if I'm joking. I'm a senior software architect at one of the biggest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. I started coding when I was 15, sold my first app at 22, and haven't stopped climbing the ladder since. I've got 3 patents to my name, I've spoken at international conferences, and my stock options are ridiculous. But Marcus, he thought I was just an admin assistant barely scraping by. To be fair, I never technically lied. We met in a coffee shop and when he asked what I did, I said I worked in tech. He gave me a polite nod, then asked if I handled executive schedules. I smiled, said something vague about supporting the team, and he filled in the blanks on his own. I just never corrected him. So why didn't I tell him the truth? Why let someone I cared about think I was broke when I could have paid off his car 10 times over? Because I learned something important a long time ago from the woman who meant the most to me, my grandmother. She raised me after my parents died when I was 7. We lived in a small house on a quiet street, she drove an old car, bought groceries at the regular store, and didn't own a single flashy thing. She taught me how to cook, how to find joy in the little stuff, and that your value has nothing to do with the number in your bank account. What I didn't find out until she passed when I was 24 was that she'd been a millionaire. She'd built a small business empire back in the day, invested smart, and chose to live modestly because she believed what really mattered was character, not appearances. She left it all to me, along with a letter I still keep in my nightstand. In that letter, she wrote something that stuck with me forever. A person's real character shows when they think no one important is watching. When they think you have nothing to offer them, that's when you see who they truly are. So when Marcus invited me to dinner at his parents' estate, hinted that things might get serious that night, and warned me that his mother was big on first impressions, I made a choice. I decided to test them the way my grandmother taught me. I showed up looking exactly like the kind of woman they assumed I was. Modest clothes, my old car, humble talk about my circumstances. And I paid close attention to how they treated someone they believed couldn't offer them a thing. Someone they thought was beneath them. Someone they assumed wasn't worth their time. Before you go thinking I was being manipulative or sneaky, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that itch to know what your partner's family really thinks of you? Like deep down? Ever gotten that weird feeling that their compliments are just for show? Or that their smiles don't quite reach their eyes? Ever wonder if they'd still be nice if they thought you had nothing to offer? I did. I wanted the truth, needed it, because I wasn't just thinking about marrying Marcus. I was thinking about marrying into his family. And as my grandmother always said, families stick with you for life. Now, real quick before I keep going, if you've made it this far and you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit that like button and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I seriously love seeing those. It blows my mind how people tune in from all over the world. Thanks for being here. Okay, back to it. The Whitmore estate? It was exactly what I imagined. And still managed to be even more over the top. The driveway alone was longer than some streets I've lived on. The gates were raw iron with gold trim, because apparently plain iron just didn't scream wealthy enough. The lawn looked like someone had measured each blade of grass before trimming it. I drove my beat-up 12-year-old Subaru Outback up that perfectly groomed driveway and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Light makeup, hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and my grandmother's tiny gold studs, the only jewelry I had on. I looked like someone who clearly didn't belong. And that was exactly the plan. Marcus met me at the door and kissed me, but it felt like he was doing it more for show than for me. His eyes scanned my outfit, dress, shoes, no fancy accessories, and something flickered across his face. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by how I looked. Clocked that. Saved it for later. Inside, the house screamed, new money trying to act old money. Every ceiling had a crystal chandelier. The walls were covered in oil painting prints inside gilded frames. Not originals, prints. The furniture looked like it cost a fortune and felt like it was never meant to actually be used. And there she was, standing in the foyer like she owned the world, Patricia Whitmore. Probably early 60s, and her face had clearly been on a first-name basis with some excellent plastic surgeons. Her blonde hair was locked into place like a helmet, likely thanks to industrial-strength hairspray. Designer dress, real jewelry, and a smile faker than a reality show reunion. She held out her hand like she was doing me a favor. I shook it and the handshake was exactly what I expected, limp, cold, dismissive. Then came the whisper to Marcus. That little dig about me looking like the help. I smiled like I didn't hear it, but I did. And in that moment, I knew I had walked into something that was going to be far more revealing than dinner. If I'd known just how much, maybe I would have shown up in full body armor instead of a navy dress. But honestly, I've always believed the best protection is information, and I came prepared. I'd done my homework. The Whitmores owned a network of car dealerships that stretched across 3 states. Not luxury brands, not sports cars, just solid mid-range vehicles. The kind regular families actually buy. Marcus' dad, Harold, inherited the business from his own father and spent the last 30 years growing it. Patricia had married in when she was 23 and wasted no time climbing every social ladder in reach. They had 2 kids. Marcus, my fiancé, was 34 and worked as a marketing manager at some unrelated company. And apparently that was a sore subject. Harold had always expected Marcus to take over the dealerships. Then there was Vivian, Marcus's older sister. She was 38, and from everything I'd found, she treated the family fortune like it was her own private ATM. I dug all this up through public records, social media deep dives, and some strategic Googling. I'd seen the photos, over-the-top parties, charity galas, society events dripping in designer labels. I even read articles praising Patricia's philanthropy, though a closer look showed her donations were usually tied to tax breaks and photo ops. But nothing I found online prepared me for meeting Vivian in person. She showed up 20 minutes late, which, as I later learned, was her signature move. Being fashionably late wasn't just a habit, it was part of her brand. She made a grand entrance into the living room in a dress that probably cost more than most people pay in rent for the month. Diamonds hung from her ears and neck like she crashed through a jewelry store and just kept walking. She greeted me with one word. Hello. Not nice to meet you. Not I've heard so much about you. Just hello. With a tone so cold it could have chilled the room. Her lips curled ever so slightly, like she'd caught a whiff of something unpleasant. I smiled back and said hello in return. She turned away almost immediately, launching into a conversation with her mother about some upcoming charity event. Something about whether last month's florist had finally been fired. They talked like I wasn't even in the room. I stood there holding the glass of water someone had handed me, feeling like the odd one out at a steakhouse, and I'm the only vegetarian. Marcus hovered awkwardly nearby, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't say a word. That was the second thing I mentally filed away. Then came Harold Whitmore, Marcus's dad. He was a different story altogether. A big guy, the kind who probably played football in his youth but had since settled into the easier life money brings. He shook my hand with a grip that was meant to impress but just came off weak. Still, his eyes were sharp, calculating. I could feel him sizing me up, not rudely but definitely with interest. There was also one other guest I hadn't expected, a man named Richard Hartley. He was introduced as a longtime family friend and business associate. Late 60s, silver hair, sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. When he shook my hand, he looked at me for a beat too long, like something about my face was familiar to him. I couldn't place him and he didn't say anything, but for the rest of the evening, I caught him watching me now and then with that same thoughtful look. Patricia eventually ushered us into the dining room, which looked like the result of someone being given an unlimited budget and absolutely no taste. The table was massive, fit for royalty, and the chairs were upholstered in what I could only guess was real silk. The place settings? Over the top. I counted 6 forks at each seat. 6. For one meal. I've seen hospital surgeries use fewer tools. Patricia noticed me eyeing the silverware and gave me that frozen, pageant-ready smile. "I suppose you're not used to formal dining," she said, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I smiled right back. "My grandmother always told me it's not the forks that matter. It's the company you keep." Her smile tightened just barely but enough. Vivian let out a snort into her wine glass. And with that, dinner officially began. The first course was a soup I couldn't even identify, but it tasted expensive, like the kind of thing that costs more per bowl than my entire weekly grocery bill. That's when Patricia started what I'd later call the interrogation dash. She began casually asking where I grew up. "Small town in Oregon," I said. "Totally true." She asked about my family. I told her my grandmother raised me. Also true. Then she asked what my parents did for a living. I told her they'd passed when I was young. Patricia made this sound, meant to be sympathetic, I think, but it came out like a drain trying to clear itself. She said it must have been tough, growing up without proper guidance. I told her my grandmother gave me all the guidance I ever needed. Vivian leaned in then, her diamonds catching the chandelier light like they were trying to steal the spotlight. She asked what my grandmother did for a living. I said she was a businesswoman. Her eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. Then came the follow-up, "What kind of business?" I shrugged. "Small ventures," I said. "Nothing too exciting." In reality, my grandmother had built a company from scratch and sold it for several $1,000,000. But that wasn't the version of the truth I needed them to hear tonight. Patricia shifted gears. She asked about my current job. I said I worked in tech. She tilted her head and asked if I was a secretary. I said it was more of a support role. She nodded, clearly satisfied, like she'd just confirmed every judgment she'd already made. "That's nice," she said, with the faintest trace of condescension. "Every team needs support staff." Marcus shifted in his seat. I could tell he was uncomfortable. Still, he said nothing. Then Vivian brought up Alexandra Dash. She dropped the name into the middle of the conversation like it was harmless, like it was just small talk. But the effect was immediate, like someone tossing a rock into still water. You could feel the ripple pass through the whole table. She said she'd seen Alexandra just last week. Said she was doing great, that her family's business was booming. I turned my eyes to Marcus. Just for a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt? Nerves? Whatever it was, it vanished almost as quickly as it came. Patricia jumped in like she'd been waiting for that name to come up. She said Alexandra had always been such a lovely girl. So smart. So polished. So perfect for their family's lifestyle. She said Alexandra and Marcus had dated for 3 years. Did I know that? I told her no, I didn't. Patricia smiled. "Such a shame, really, how it ended," she said. "Everyone assumed they'd end up together." Then came the kicker. Alexandra's family ran an import business that specialized in luxury vehicles. A perfect match for the Whitmore car empire. The message couldn't have been clearer. Alexandra was the right kind of woman, and I wasn't. I glanced around the room, and for the first time, I noticed the photo wall behind me. I shifted slightly in my seat and took it in. A gallery of Whitmore family milestones. Christmases. Birthdays. Graduations. And in at least 4 of those pictures, there she was. A beautiful dark-haired woman standing beside Marcus, her arm through his, smiling like she belonged there. Alexandra. Patricia saw me looking but didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The smug satisfaction on her face said it all. Vivian couldn't resist twisting the knife. She said it was such a shock Alexandra was still single. Really surprising that no one had swept her off her feet. Almost like she was waiting for someone. I turned back toward the table and smiled. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," I said. Vivian blinked, caught off guard by my calm. Patricia recovered quickly. "Yes," she said. "Alexandra is remarkable." Then, with all the grace of a wrecking ball, she added, "I just hope you won't feel too out of place in our world, given your more modest background." I raised an eyebrow. "Modest?" I asked. Her smile stretched, now sharp around the edges. Of course. Not everyone is born with certain advantages. Some people work regular jobs, live ordinary lives. There's no shame in being common. Common. She had actually called me common. Something inside me shifted, but I kept my face still. I hadn't come here for approval. I came to see them for who they really were. And now I was seeing it. All of it. That's when Marcus finally opened his mouth. He said his mother didn't mean anything by that she was just being protective. Patricia reached over and patted his hand. Of course I'm being protective, she said. A mother always wants the best for her son. She didn't say the rest out loud, but the message hung in the air like smoke. And you are not the best. Harold cleared his throat, probably trying to steer things back into safer territory. He asked if I had any hobbies, interests outside of work. I told him I liked reading, hiking, cooking simple meals. Nothing fancy. Vivian let out a laugh, light and mocking. That's adorable, she said. Like I just listed off my favorite crayons in kindergarten. That's when Richard, the quiet one so far, finally spoke up. He said there was something to be said for enjoying simple things. He told a quick story about his grandmother, how she lived a modest life and was still the happiest person he'd ever known. Patricia shot him a look that could have soured cream. Richard didn't even blink. He just kept looking at me with that same curious, thoughtful expression. Then he asked, almost out of nowhere, what my grandmother's name had been. Margaret Graham, I said. His eyebrows ticked up for a second, but he didn't press. Just gave a small nod, turned back to his soup and said nothing more. The rest of dinner went pretty much the same way. Patricia and Vivian kept tossing little barbed questions at me, each one just polite enough to avoid open conflict, but clearly meant to put me in my place. That place, in their minds, was far, far below them. Marcus tried barely to defend me. A weak smile here, a mumbled, "That's not fair" there. But it was obvious his heart wasn't in it. He didn't want to rock the boat. Didn't want to upset his mother. Harold stayed mostly quiet, watching it all unfold with the weary look of a man who'd long since accepted that fighting with Patricia was pointless. And Richard? He kept watching me. Not in a creepy way. More like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. By the time dessert hit the table, I had all the clarity I needed about the Whitmore family. They were high-class snobs through and through. The kind of people who measured your worth by the size of your bank account and the power of your last name. They didn't see me as a future daughter-in-law. They saw me as a threat, a mistake, something that needed to be corrected. But that wasn't the only thing I learned. Marcus wasn't who I thought he was. The man I fell in love with had been kind, attentive, thoughtful. He'd looked me in the eye like I mattered. But this version of Marcus? The one who sat silent while his family insulted me all night? This man was spineless, passive, more afraid of disappointing his mother than standing up for the woman he said he loved. And I couldn't help but wonder, had he always been like this? Had I just missed it? I was about to find out. After dessert, Patricia stood up and announced we'd moved to the sitting room for coffee. The men drifted toward the windows, slipping into some business chat. Vivian made a big show of excusing herself to take a call. Patricia said she had to check something with the housekeeper and would join us shortly. And just like that, I was alone. Perfect opportunity. I excused myself, said I needed the bathroom. Marcus pointed me down a long hallway toward the back of the house, past more overpriced artwork and soulless decor. I walked slowly, taking it all in. The house was undeniably expensive, but it didn't feel like a home. Felt more like a showroom. Cold. Empty. The kind of place people pretended to live in for magazine spreads. The bathroom wasn't hard to find, but I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for clarity. For something, anything, that would help me make sense of this whole night. And what I found was much more than I expected. As I passed a door that was slightly ajar, I heard voices. Patricia's voice. Then Vivian's. I froze. Every instinct told me to walk away, to respect their privacy, to not be that person sneaking around and listening in like it was some trashy drama. But something in Patricia's voice made me stop. It wasn't casual. It was sharp, urgent. I stepped closer, just enough to hear. Staying in the shadows. Patricia was saying they needed to handle the situation quickly. That Marcus couldn't be allowed to make this mistake. Vivian agreed. Said she couldn't believe he actually brought her here. Thought this was just another phase like his vegetarian streak in college. Patricia's voice dropped lower, harder. This is more serious than a diet, she said. This woman could ruin everything. My pulse picked up. My ears were ringing. They were talking about me. Of course they were talking about me. But it was what came next that truly made my blood run cold. Vivian said the timing couldn't be worse. The merger with the Castellano family to happen. And for that to work, Marcus had to be with Alexandra. Castellano. That was Alexandra's last name. The luxury car import family. Suddenly, the pieces snapped into place. Patricia chimed in, saying the dealership was struggling, and that the Castellano partnership was their lifeline to get through the next fiscal year. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I'd suspected something from the little signs I'd picked up in my research, but this confirmed it. The Whitmore dealerships were in real financial trouble. Vivian kept going. She said Marcus was supposed to keep Alexandra on the hook while they ironed out the deal. That had been the plan all along. In return for the Castellano investment, Alexandra's family would gain access to the Whitmore distribution network. And Marcus? He'd promised Patricia he was keeping his options open with Alexandra. Options open. While proposing to me, I leaned against the wall, my thoughts spinning. This wasn't just some old-school snobbery. It wasn't just a family not liking their son's choice in women. This was cold, strategic, calculated. And Marcus? He wasn't just weak or indecisive. He was using me. But for what? If Alexandra was always the endgame, why keep me around? Vivian answered that question without knowing it. She called Marcus a fool. Said he actually seemed to like this little secretary, this nobody. He was only supposed to use me as a placeholder while the deal was finalized, but he'd gotten too attached. A placeholder. That's what I was. A filler. A warm body to keep Marcus distracted while the real prize, Alexandra, was being lined up behind the scenes. Then Patricia said they'd take care of it. That they'd make the engagement announcement tonight. Get Marcus locked in publicly, and then later find some way to break it off. Once Alexandra was secured. Vivian asked, what kind of terrible secret? And Patricia? She didn't miss a beat. We'll make one up if we have to. I stood there in that hallway frozen, listening to two women plot the end of my relationship like they were planning appetizers for a dinner party. Then Vivian twisted the knife just a little more. She said at least I was too stupid to suspect any of this. That Marcus had chosen well in that sense. I was naive, trusting, probably just grateful that someone like him had noticed me at all. Patricia laughed in agreement. That's when I stepped back. I moved silently down the hallway, hands trembling. Not with heartbreak but with fury. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was desperate. They thought I'd be grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw my way. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I found the bathroom. Splashed cold water on my face. Looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She wasn't devastated. She was thinking, I'd come here tonight to test Marcus's family, and they'd failed. Miserably. But what I hadn't expected was discovering that Marcus was part of it. He wasn't stuck between me and his family. He was lying to me right alongside them. Now the question was, what was I going to do about it? I could confront him, march back into that room, expose the whole twisted plan, cause a scene, and walk out of their lives for good. But that would be too easy. Too quick. They'd write me off as emotional, dramatic, bitter. They'd say I was just proving their point. No. If I was going to respond to this betrayal, I was going to do it my way. My terms. With a plan they'd never see coming. Because my grandmother taught me many things. But one lesson stood above all the rest. She used to say that when someone underestimates you, they're handing you a gift, the element of surprise. And right then, Patricia and Vivian had just given me the greatest gift of all. They had no clue what I was capable of. I fixed my makeup, smoothed my hair, and walked back into that sitting room with a calm, pleasant smile on my face. The game was on. As soon as I stepped back in, I could tell something had shifted. The furniture had been subtly rearranged, the lighting just slightly dimmed to set a mood. Patricia stood by the fireplace, practically vibrating with anticipation. Harold looked stiff and awkward by the doorway. Vivian was pretending to admire a painting, though I caught her smirking at Marcus. And Marcus? He was standing right in the center of the room, nervous energy radiating off him like heat from a radiator. When he saw me, he turned and gave me a smile that tried to look loving, but didn't quite land. He walked over, took both my hands, and said he had something to ask me. I felt it happening. The trap closing in. He started with a little speech. Said he knew we hadn't been together that long. That his family could be a lot. But he also said he knew what he wanted. He said he wanted me dash. And then he dropped to one knee. The ring he pulled out was big and sparkly. Exactly the type of thing Patricia would sign off on. But even under the softened lights, I could already tell. Cloudy diamond, uneven setting. It looked impressive. Until you really looked. Kind of like the man holding it. Marcus asked me to marry him. Behind him, Patricia was glowing like she just orchestrated the ending to a romantic movie. This was the move, the first phase of their strategy. Lock Marcus into a public engagement with me, then quietly tear it apart when Alexandra was ready to step back in. They just needed time. And a little distraction. Me. I saw it all clearly in a single breath. And I knew I had a choice. I could say no. Walk away from the ring, the lies, the entire toxic circus, and keep my self-respect intact. But that would end the story too early. I thought about what I'd overheard. The plan to ruin me. To invent something that would justify throwing me away. They expected me to crumble. They expected me to be the naive, desperate little secretary who got in over her head. How sweet it would be to show them how wrong they were. So I smiled and I said yes. Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger, and Patricia started clapping like she just witnessed the final act of a Broadway show. Vivian tossed out a cold congratulations that could have frozen water. Harold shook Marcus's hand and gave a stiff well done, as if he hadn't just been standing there watching a performance. Across the room, Richard caught my eye. There was something different in his look now, an awareness, maybe even a little respect. Like he sensed this story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I gave him a quiet smile. He smiled back. The rest of the night was a haze of champagne toasts and empty compliments. Patricia was already rambling about engagement party themes. Vivian brought up venue options. Harold clumsily mentioned potential business opportunities, now that our families were joining, though it was clear he had no clue what my family could possibly offer. Marcus barely left my side. He played the role of proud, doting fiancé so well that, if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him. And I wasn't about to forget. Finally, when the night wound down, Marcus walked me out to my car. The air was cold and still, the sky sharp and clear overhead. We stood in the driveway for a moment, just looking at each other. He asked if I was okay. Said he knew his family could be a bit much, but promised they'd come around. I told him I understood. Said I was just tired. He kissed me goodnight. And then I got in my car and drove away from the Whitmore estate, with their ring on my finger, and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning I got to work. If there's one thing my job has taught me, it's that knowledge is power. Data. Documentation. Cold hard facts. I spend my days breaking down complex systems, finding the flaws and building better ones. And now I was about to take those skills and turn them on the Whitmore family. What I uncovered over the next few days didn't just confirm what I'd heard. It went even deeper. The Whitmore dealerships weren't just in a slump. They were in serious trouble. Structural trouble. They'd expanded too fast during the good years, loaded up on debt, and now everything was crashing down around them. Their main franchise agreement was up for renewal, and the manufacturer was already scouting other partners. This wasn't just a strategic move with Alexandra's family. It was desperation. But that wasn't all I found. As I dug deeper, I uncovered something the Whitmores probably thought had been buried for good. Vivian was embezzling from the company. It started small, tiny amounts tucked into vague expense reports and petty cash. But over the years it added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled away to fund her designer wardrobe and luxury lifestyle. While the business floundered, I gathered everything: financial reports, legal filings, flagged transactions. Printed them out, built a file. Then I started making calls. My grandmother's name still meant something in certain circles. The relationship she built over decades hadn't forgotten the Graham name, or the way she did business. When I reached out, people remembered. And they were willing to talk. One of them happened to know Richard Hartley. And as it turned out, Richard had his own score to settle with the Whitmores. Years ago, they cut him out of a business deal. It wasn't illegal, but it was dirty. Shady enough to leave a mark. He'd been waiting ever since for a way to even the score. I was about to hand it to him. Before we go any further, I just want to take a moment to thank you. Seriously, this channel means the world to me. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps more than you realize. If you're enjoying the story, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really does make a difference. Alright, back to the story. The next few weeks were all about patience and performance. I played the role of glowing fiancé like I'd been cast in the role of a lifetime. I smiled through family dinners at the Whitmore estate. I listened to Patricia's snide little digs like they were compliments. I watched Vivian strut around in her newest designer haul, knowing full well exactly where that money had come from. And I watched Marcus. He'd changed. Or maybe I was finally seeing the version of him he'd been all along. What once looked like charm now felt rehearsed. The sweet words sounded like lines from a well-worn script. And his phone, he guarded it like it held state secrets. Every buzz, every notification, he'd glance quickly, turn the screen, tuck it away. I knew who it was. I'd seen the name light up on his screen more than once. Alexandra. One evening, I told him I was working late. Instead, I parked outside a restaurant where he said he had a client dinner. He wasn't meeting a client. He was meeting her dash. I watched through the window as they sat in a quiet corner booth, heads close, deep in conversation. Their body language said it all. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. Later, she laughed at something he said and touched his face. I took photos. Not because I needed them for court or to prove anything to the Whitmores. I took them because I wanted to remember. I wanted a record of who he really was. Marcus Whitmore wasn't just spineless. He wasn't just a mama's boy trying to play both sides. He was a liar. A cheater. A man playing two women while his family pulled the strings behind the scenes. The rage that hit me in that moment burned clean and hot. But I didn't lose control. I didn't storm into the restaurant. I didn't throw open the door and cause a scene. Not yet. I went home. I printed the photos. And I added them to the file. Richard and I had been meeting regularly. Quiet, off-the-grid check-ins in places no Whitmore would ever set foot. He brought his own folder of receipts. Proof of years of shady dealings and unethical business practices by the family. And he knew people, plenty of people, who'd been burned by the Whitmores over the years. He wasn't just willing to help me. He wanted to help. But one day he looked at me across the table and asked a simple question. Why are you doing this? He said he knew what was in it. He had history. He had his own reasons. But what about me? Was this about revenge, or something deeper? I sat with that question for a while. Then I told him the truth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The Whitmores had spent their entire lives weaponizing wealth and reputation. They used people, discarded anyone who didn't fit their perfect image, and acted like they were untouchable because of a last name and a balance sheet. They treated lesser people like background noise. Marcus had grown up in that mold. And he was being groomed to keep the pattern going. Someone had to remind them that consequences don't care how rich you are. Richard nodded. Slowly. Your grandmother would be proud, he said. That was the moment I knew, without a shred of doubt, I was doing the right thing. 3 weeks out from the engagement party, Patricia launched into full royal wedding mode. The event was going to be the social moment of the season. They were hosting it on their estate and had invited half the business community. CEOs. Investors. Everyone with a name and a wallet. Patricia treated it like her own personal coronation. She had no idea the crown was about to fall. I spent those 3 weeks preparing. Richard and I coordinated every detail. I made phone calls. I reached out to industry players. And I contacted the car manufacturer that had been looking to replace the Whitmores. When I shared what I knew, their interest skyrocketed. And then the night before the party, I gave Marcus one last shot. We were in his apartment going over logistics for the big event. I asked him gently how he felt about us. About the future. Just to see what he'd say. He looked at me with that same carefully practiced expression I used to think was sincere. He said he was excited. That he couldn't wait to marry me. Then I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me. Anything at all. He held my gaze and said no, that I was everything he'd ever hoped for. So I asked about Alexandra. The color drained from his face. It came back fast and he tried to recover, called her an old friend, someone from the past. Nothing to worry about. I nodded, and in that moment I understood him completely. Marcus would lie straight to my face if it kept the plan intact. He wasn't torn. He wasn't conflicted. He was just his mother's son. The next evening, I didn't pull something out of the acceptable closet. I didn't wear navy or flats or anything designed to blend in. No, tonight I showed up as me. I wore a designer gown from my real wardrobe, a deep emerald green, fitted to perfection by someone whose name made fashion editors whisper. The kind of dress that doesn't just enter a room. I looked in the mirror and smiled. It was time. The Whitmore estate had been transformed into a scene out of a luxury magazine. White tints were scattered across the lawn. Chandeliers dangled from custom structures, and a quartet played Mozart beside the marble fountain. Waiters floated around with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like they came straight out of a Michelin kitchen. Patricia had spared no expense. This wasn't just a party. This was a power move. I pulled up in my faithful old Subaru, and the valet team blinked like I just interrupted a luxury car commercial. One of them even asked if I was with the catering staff. I smiled, handed him the keys, and kept walking. The path from the lot to the main tent felt like a runway. Every step peeled away the character I'd been playing for the past 3 weeks. No more nervous girlfriend. No more grateful fiancé. No more humble girl hoping for a seat at Patricia Whitmore's table. Tonight I was Ella Graham. Real Ella Graham. And I was here to rewrite the ending. My jewelry that night was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who actually knew what they were looking at. Around my neck hung my grandmother's diamond pendant, simple in design, but appraised at more than most cars. On my wrist was a limited edition watch, only 50 of them existed in the world. For 14 months I'd hidden who I was. Toned it down. Played it small. Not tonight. The first person to notice me was a woman I didn't recognize. Someone's date, maybe a wife or girlfriend, standing near the entrance to the main tent. She looked once, did a double take, and leaned in to whisper to the man beside her. They both stared. I didn't break stride. Next came Harold. He was at the bar, welcoming guests with a half-hearted cheer of a man who'd rather be at home watching golf. When he saw me, his smile froze. His eyes scanned me, face, dress, jewelry, then back to my face again. The confusion was instant and obvious. "Good evening," I said, smiling. "Thank you for hosting such a lovely event." He stumbled through a reply, something about being glad I could make it, but I was already walking away before he could ask the questions brewing behind his eyes. Inside the tent there were maybe 100 people. All handpicked, business connections, society names, trusted allies. I recognized several from my research. The regional manager from the car manufacturer, a couple rival dealership owners, a local business journalist. And then there was Patricia, holding court near the champagne fountain like royalty. She wore a cream-colored gown, expensive no doubt, though clearly off the rack, despite how hard she was trying to project elegance. Her jewelry was nice by conventional standards, but forgettable if you'd ever seen real generational wealth. She was laughing, too loudly, at something a guest said, head tilted back in that rehearsed finishing school way. She hadn't spotted me yet. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and started weaving through the crowd, introducing myself to guests as I went. Each interaction followed the same rhythm. A quick double take. Surprise when I said I was Marcus's fiancée. More surprise when they noticed my dress, my jewelry, my voice, all of it clashing with whatever story they'd been fed about the secretary. And just like that, the whispers started. I saw the glances, the phones being checked, people wondering, who is she really? Good. By the time I reached Patricia's circle, she was finishing a story about her recent charity work, spoken in the carefully scripted language of someone trying to sound generous without giving too much. She turned to greet me with her usual frozen smile, and then her face changed. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then just for a flicker a hint of fear. She said my name like a question. "Good evening, Patricia," I replied with a smile. "Thank you so much for throwing such a beautiful party." Her eyes darted across every inch of me, scanning for clues. The dress that cost more than her monthly staff payroll. The pendant that once graced the cover of a jewelry magazine. The watch she probably hadn't seen outside of an ad in a luxury quarterly. She asked where I got these things, trying to keep her voice composed, but I could hear the crack underneath. "Oh," I said casually. "Just a few pieces I've been saving." Tonight felt like a special occasion. That's when Vivian appeared, drawn by whatever silent panic her mother had signaled. She looked me over, and her expression followed the same path as Patricia's. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. But Vivian pulled it together faster. She gave me a syrupy sweet smile and said my dress was interesting. Then with a smirk she asked if it was a rental. I smiled back, cool and easy. "No," I said. "The designer made it just for me. He's a close friend." Then I said his name. And it hit Vivian like a slap. This wasn't just any designer. He was the designer, someone who dressed A-listers, who had a wait list longer than some political careers, and who definitely didn't whip up custom gowns for secretaries scraping by on a budget. Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I didn't wait. I excused myself and walked away to find Marcus. Behind me, I heard Patricia hiss something to Vivian, something frantic, about needing to figure out what was going on. Vivian, still stunned, mumbled that she didn't know, that none of this made sense. I smiled to myself. Phase 1 was complete. The seed of doubt was planted. Now I just had to let it grow. Marcus found me before I found him. He came from a knot of guests by the bar, pale-faced and wide-eyed, looking like someone who'd just been hit with a wave of confusion and couldn't come up for air. He'd heard the whispers, seen the double takes, and now he was looking at me like he couldn't quite process who I was. He asked what was going on, asked where I got the dress, the jewelry, the sudden transformation, asked why I looked like a completely different person. "I don't," I told him calmly. "I look like myself." He stared at me and I saw it, that first hairline crack in the mental picture he created of me. He didn't fully understand yet, but something inside him had started to shift. The image he'd built, the lies he'd convinced himself were truth, were starting to fracture. He asked if we could talk privately. I smiled and said, "Later." After all, this was our engagement party. We had guests to attend to. Before he could argue, I took his arm and steered him across the tent to a group of industry heavyweights. These were the real power players of the regional automotive world, the ones whose opinions could make or break a dealership's future. They'd been watching me. Their curiosity wasn't even subtle. This time I introduced myself the right way. "Ella Graham," I said. Then I stated my position, my actual job title, and named the company. I watched the gears turn. Recognition flickered across a few faces. One man, silver hair, sharp suit, ran a rival dealership network, nodded. He said he'd heard of me. His nephew worked in tech, and my name had come up in connection with some kind of software innovation. "That's very kind of him," I said. Then another guest, a woman who oversaw M&A deals at a major investment firm, leaned in. She asked if I was related to Margaret Graham. "She was my grandmother," I said. The woman's eyebrows went up. "She was a remarkable businesswoman," she said. "The Graham name still means something in the right circles." Beside me, I felt Marcus tense. He had no idea what any of this meant. He'd never bothered to ask about my family. Not really. He'd assumed that modest upbringing meant irrelevant. That grandmother raised me meant, probably struggled. That being poor meant I couldn't possibly be important. That was his mistake. And now he was watching it unfold in real time. Conversation by conversation. The truth started to ripple through the crowd. I saw people talking in hushed voices, glancing my way, checking their phones, fact-checking what they just heard. The narrative that Patricia had so carefully constructed was slipping out from under her heels. And she had no idea how to stop it. About an hour in, Richard arrived. He found me near the rose garden, just as I'd managed a few minutes alone. Marcus had been pulled away by Harold for one of those vague, urgent chats. Richard's eyes were sharp, focused. "The manufacturer's rep is here," he said. I nodded. "How'd it go?" "He's very interested in what I gave him," Richard said with a quiet smile. "I think he's ready to make a move. Are you ready?" He looked at me and said, "I've been ready for years." We talked a few more minutes, confirming the final steps of what would happen next. Then he disappeared back into the crowd like a man slipping into position before the curtain rises. I returned to my role, the glowing, gracious bride-to-be. And then came Patricia. She'd pulled herself back together, but I could see the stress in her eyes, the way her jaw clenched beneath her polished exterior. She found me near the tent entrance and pulled me aside with more force than necessary. Her grip was tight. Her voice was low and clipped. "What are you doing?" she asked. I blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You know what I mean," she snapped. "The dress. The jewelry. The things you're saying about your grandmother and your job. What is this?" I looked her dead in the eye. "There's no game," I said. "I'm just being myself." She said that was impossible. She said Marcus had told her everything about me, that I was a secretary, that I lived in a tiny studio, that I drove a car fit for the scrapyard. I told her Marcus had made a lot of assumptions. I reminded her I never actually said those things. Patricia's face went completely still. I told her I worked in tech, which was true. I told her I had a support role, which was also true. Senior architects do support development teams. And I told her I never once claimed to be poor. I just never corrected the story they built in their heads. She asked me why. I met her eyes and said, "Because my grandmother always told me, real character only shows when someone thinks no one important is watching." Then I said, I wanted to see who the Whitmore family really was. I watched the color drain from her face. And I said, "Now I know." Before she could say a word, the string quartet stopped. Then Harold's voice came over the speaker system, announcing it was time for the toasts and speeches. Patricia looked at me again, this time with something close to fear. I smiled, and I walked toward the stage. The spotlight was waiting. The stage was set at the far end of the tent, covered in flowers and soft lighting meant to look romantic but feeling more like a spotlight over a chessboard, right before the queen gets taken. Harold stood at the mic, welcoming everyone, thanking them for coming to celebrate what he called a very special occasion. He talked about family, tradition, the importance of strong partnerships in both life and business. His eyes kept flicking toward Patricia, who was moving toward the stage with all the subtlety of a general walking into war. She reached him just as he wrapped up. Then she took the mic, all smooth transition and tight composure. Her smile was flawless again on the surface. She said how thrilled she was to welcome everyone to this beautiful celebration of her son's engagement. She called me a wonderful young woman, and said I'd be a perfect addition to the Whitmore family. Her voice oozed approval. Then she pivoted. She started talking about the future, big plans, new opportunities, business growth, strategic alliances, expansion into new territories, the next exciting chapter of the Whitmore legacy. I spotted the manufacturer's rep shifting in his seat, suddenly very still. Then I saw Richard standing near the back, make the smallest nod in his direction. Patricia was setting the stage for something bigger. She was using this party, this announcement, as a business pitch. A veiled declaration that the Castellano merger was in the bag, that everything was moving forward, that the Whitmores were in control. She turned and called Marcus to the stage. He climbed the steps, trying to hide the tension in his shoulders behind that well-rehearsed smile. He stood next to her, scanning the crowd, searching for me. His expression complicated. Patricia smiled at the audience and said there was one more person who belonged on that stage. She said she wanted to welcome her future daughter-in-law, the woman who had captured her son's heart. Then she said my name, and every head turned. I set my champagne glass down, and I walked toward the stage. The tent was silent except for the sound of my heels on the floor. People didn't just watch, they stared. The whispers had been growing all night, and now everyone knew something was coming. But they didn't know what. I stepped onto the stage and stood beside Marcus. He reached for my hand, but his grip was weak, hesitant. Then Patricia handed me the mic with that perfect little smile that didn't come anywhere near her eyes. "I'm sure you'd like to say a few words," she said. I looked at the microphone in my hand. Then I looked at Marcus. I looked at Patricia, who still thought this moment belonged to her. Then I looked out at the crowd, at all the faces, at the people whose opinions could shape the future of the Whitmore name. And I took a breath. I said, yes, I did want to say a few words. And then I began. I thanked Patricia for the warm welcome she'd given me. And then I thanked the entire Whitmore family for showing me exactly who they really were over the past few weeks. Patricia's smile flickered just slightly. I said, "When I first came to this house, I made a choice. I chose to let the Whitmores see a version of me that was simple. A woman without designer clothes, without big titles. A woman they might see as beneath them." The tent was silent. No glasses clinking. No whispers. I continued. I said I wanted to see how they would treat someone they believed had nothing to offer. Someone they thought couldn't help them. Someone they considered, in Patricia's own words, common. Patricia went ghost white. I said the experience had been enlightening. I described that first dinner, how they compared me to Marcus's ex, Alexandra. I described the hushed comments Patricia whispered behind wine glasses, the words she assumed I couldn't hear. I said I was called the help, common, a gold digger, all by people who knew nothing about me. I glanced at Marcus. He was staring at me now, frozen in place, his face twisted in horror. And then I said, "But the worst thing I learned, I wasn't supposed to hear." And I told them. I told the crowd about the voices I heard coming from the study, Patricia and Vivian, plotting how to remove me, planning how to push me out of Marcus's life, describing me as a placeholder, someone to keep Marcus busy while they arranged the real future with Alexandra Castellano. Gasps rippled through the tent like a wave. And I kept going. I said, "I found out the Whitmore dealerships are in serious financial trouble, that the merger with the Castellano family wasn't just business, it was a lifeline." And then I dropped the last part about Marcus. I said he had been keeping his options open with Alexandra the entire time we were together. I pulled out my phone and held it up. The screen lit with a photo, Marcus and Alexandra, holding hands across a restaurant table, laughing, close, intimate. I said, "This was taken 2 weeks ago, on a night Marcus told me he was working late." The crowd erupted. Shocked murmurs, heads turning, people whispering in disbelief. Marcus grabbed my arm, desperate now. He stammered, "This isn't what it looks like. I can explain." I pulled my arm back. "You already did," I said. "Last night, when I gave you a chance to be honest, and you chose to lie." I turned back to the audience. "There's more." And suddenly it was silent again, utterly still. Everyone understood they weren't watching an engagement party anymore. They were watching the mask drop. I said I'd spent the past few weeks researching the Whitmore business. I said the numbers weren't hard to find if you knew where to look. I listed the signs: declining sales, unpaid invoices, debt piling up, and a franchise agreement that was on the verge of collapse. Harold's face had gone gray. But I wasn't done. I said, "And I also found something else. Something bigger." I looked directly at Vivian. She stood near the back, stiff and pale like a statue no one wanted to touch. I said, "Vivian Whitmore has been embezzling from the family business for years." A wave of gasps surged through the crowd. I said it started small, little numbers buried in expense reports, travel budgets, petty cash, but over time it grew. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gone. Vivian's husband turned toward her, staring like he was seeing her for the first time. Vivian's face twisted. "That's a lie," she snapped. "You have no proof. You're just some bitter woman trying to blow up our family." That's when Richard stepped forward. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked to the front of the crowd, holding a leather folder. "I have proof," he said. He made his way to the stage and handed the folder directly to the manufacturer's representative, who had edged closer with the grim expression of a man watching a train wreck confirm every rumor he'd heard. Richard said he had documentation. Years of it. Bank statements. Fraudulent expenses. Transfer records. Enough to bury Vivian in more than scandal. Then he turned to the crowd. He said the Whitmores had cheated him once 15 years ago. A dirty deal that cost him money and reputation. Nothing illegal, just dishonest enough to sting. He said he'd been waiting ever since to see them exposed. And now, that time had come. He said that when I came to him with evidence of what the Whitmores were really doing, he didn't hesitate. He had seen their damage firsthand. And he was more than happy to contribute what he knew. That's when Patricia finally found her voice. She snapped that this was outrageous. that we had no right to make such accusations, that she would sue us for defamation. I looked at her calmly and said she was welcome to try. I said everything I had shared was documented, verifiable, and sourced. The financial records? Publicly available for anyone who knew where to look. The evidence of Vivian's embezzlement? Compiled from legitimate sources that would stand up in any courtroom. Then I looked at Marcus, still standing there beside me, looking like the floor had just opened up beneath him, like he'd fallen and hadn't landed yet. And I said, "There's one more thing." I reached for my hand, and slowly I slid the engagement ring off my finger. The cloudy diamond caught the light again, revealing every one of its flaws, cheap stone, weak setting, all illusion. I held it up, and I said I would not be marrying Marcus Whitmore. I said I had never planned to, not after learning the truth about him and his family. The only reason I said yes in the first place was to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. Then I handed him the ring. "Give it to Alexandra," I said. "She's the one you actually wanted anyway." Marcus's face crumpled. He stammered that it wasn't true, that he had feelings for me, that the Alexandra situation was just business, something his mother had arranged. It didn't mean anything. And I said that was exactly the problem. I said he had let his mother arrange his life, his relationships, his entire future. I said he had stood there silent every time they belittled me, every time they tore me down. I said he had the chance to tell me the truth the night before. And he looked me in the eye and lied. And I told him flatly, any man who lies to the woman he claims to love is not a man I would ever marry. The tent was dead silent. I turned to face the crowd one last time. "I'm Ella Graham," I said. "I'm a senior software architect. I built my career through hard work, skill, and integrity. I make more money in a month than most people make in a year. And I live simply, because my grandmother taught me that wealth is not the measure of a person's worth." I said the Whitmores had revealed who they truly were, that they judged people by bank balances and designer labels, that they treated me with contempt because they thought I had nothing to offer. And I said character like that doesn't need help to collapse. It will eventually destroy itself. I set the microphone down, and I walked off the stage. The crowd parted for me without a word. No one tried to stop me. Behind me, I heard it all begin to fall apart. Patricia's voice, shrill and cracking, trying to spin it, scrambling to call it a misunderstanding, calling me disturbed, claiming none of it was true. But the damage was already done. I heard the manufacturer's rep on his phone, his tone clipped and final, making calls, cutting ties. Guests started whispering louder now, some already heading for the exits, eager to escape before the house of cards came down on their heads. As I reached the edge of the tent, I paused for just a moment. Vivian was near the bar, cornered by her husband. She was pleading, explaining, twisting the truth into something she could live with. But he wasn't buying it. His face was stone, like he didn't even recognize the woman in front of him anymore. Harold was slumped in a chair, head in his hands. The man who had built the Whitmore name now crumbling under the weight of secrets he probably suspected, but never dared face. And Marcus stood alone on the stage, still holding the ring I'd given back to him. He was looking at me. I don't know what emotion was on his face, regret, pain, maybe just disbelief. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. I stepped out of the tent and into the cool, clear night. The stars were bright overhead, quiet and distant, completely indifferent to the storm of human drama unraveling beneath them. I took a deep breath. The air felt different, cleaner, lighter. Like the weight I'd been carrying for weeks had finally been lifted. A few minutes later, Richard found me standing by the fountain. "It's done," he said. The manufacturer had already made the call. The Whitmore dealerships would lose their franchise by the end of the month. I asked if he felt satisfied. He paused, then shook his head. "Satisfaction isn't the word," he said. "It feels more like relief, like paying off a debt that's been hanging over you for years." I nodded. I understood that feeling. Then he asked what I was going to do next. "I'm going home," I said. "I'm going to sleep. For the first time in weeks, I think I'll actually rest. And tomorrow, I'll get up and keep building the life I've already created. A life that has nothing to do with Marcus Whitmore or his family." Richard smiled. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you tonight." The comment caught me off guard. I felt my eyes sting, the tears sharp and uninvited. "I hope so," I whispered. He handed me a business card. Said if I ever needed anything I should call him. That he owed me now. I slipped the card into my purse and thanked him. Then I walked to the valet station, collected my beat-up old Subaru from a stunned young attendant who looked like he'd just watched a twist ending with no script, and I drove away from the Whitmore estate for the last time. In the rearview mirror I could see the party falling apart. Guests leaving in waves, the tent lit up in chaos, Patricia flailing, gesturing wildly, trying to stitch a story back together that was already long gone. I didn't look again. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on music. I didn't make any calls. I just drove mile after mile, letting the distance settle between me and everything I'd left behind. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my modest apartment, I didn't go in right away. I just sat in the car, hands resting on the wheel. I thought about Marcus, about who I thought he was and who he really turned out to be. I thought about how close I'd come to tying my life to his, to marrying into a family that would have chipped away at me day by day, until there was nothing left. I thought about my grandmother, about the lessons she passed on, the ones that mattered most. And I thought about the future. My future. The one I would shape with people who saw me, respected me, and valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I finally stepped out of the car and went inside. My apartment was small, simple, quiet, and exactly how I liked it. I made a cup of tea, changed out of the designer dress, and curled up in my old, soft robe next to the window. The city lights sparkled below, thousands of tiny stories playing out behind thousands of windows. I was just one of them. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. And for the first time in a long time that felt perfect. 1 week later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. A news alert. Whitmore Automotive facing closure after franchise termination. I opened the article and read every word. The manufacturer had officially ended its partnership with the Whitmore dealerships, citing serious concerns regarding financial oversight and ethical conduct. Without the franchise agreement, the dealerships couldn't sell new vehicles. And without new vehicle sales, the business had no future. The article went on. Several former business partners had come forward with their own complaints about years of unethical practices. An internal investigation had turned up troubling financial irregularities, now being reviewed by authorities. It also mentioned that Vivian Whitmore had stepped down from her executive role, pending further inquiry. It didn't mention me. Just like I asked, Richard had kept his word. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about credit or revenge or headlines. It was about the truth. And now, it was out. Part 16. I finished my coffee and looked around my tiny kitchen. The same space I'd been sitting in a month ago, before all of this had started, before the dresses and diamonds, before the staged smiles and whispered insults, before the tent full of secrets came crashing down. The same kitchen where I'd first decided to test the Whitmore family, to strip away the layers and see who they really were beneath all that polish. So much had changed since then. And yet, in this small, quiet kitchen, everything had stayed the same. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Marcus. He said he needed to see me. Said he could explain everything. Said he had made mistakes, but he still cared about me. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, and then I deleted it. No reply. No second thoughts. Some doors once closed are better left that way. I stood up and walked over to the window. The morning sun was rising, painting the city in soft gold. It was going to be a beautiful day. A day for starting over. A day for choosing something better. Around my neck, my grandmother's pendant rested warm against my skin. I reached up and touched it. She had lived simply, not because she couldn't afford more, but because she knew better than most that the things that truly matter in life aren't things at all. Love, integrity, self-respect, the quiet peace that comes from knowing you lived by your principles, even when it would have been easier to compromise. The Whitmores had thought they could buy their way through life, that money and status gave them a pass to treat people however they wanted. They were wrong. I turned away from the window and got ready for work. My regular job at my regular company, the place where I was valued for my mind dash, my work ethic dash, and my character. Not for the size of my savings account or the name on my jewelry. The story of the Whitmore family would keep unfolding. There would be headlines, investigations, courtrooms, maybe even handcuffs. But that was their story now, not mine. My story was just beginning, and it would be written my way, with my voice, with my values. That was what my grandmother had always tried to teach me. That worth isn't about bank accounts or brand names. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. It's about how you treat people who can't give you anything. The Whiters failed that test in every way that mattered. And me? Passed it. I found the answer I was looking for. I didn't need Patricia's approval. I didn't need Marcus's love. I didn't need anyone else to validate me, because I already knew who I was. And that was enough.